Hey everyone, welcome back to another Explainer. Today we are unpacking the anatomy of a lab disaster. We often think of major catastrophes as the result of massive, catastrophic failures, right? But today we're going to see how just one tiny, seemingly insignificant procedural lapse in a highly controlled medical environment can trigger absolute chaos.
So, I want you to really think about this for a second. How can one forgotten pair of gloves literally shut down an entire medical laboratory? I mean, it sounds like a total exaggeration, right? Kind of like a plot from some late-night medical thriller. But as you'll see, we are going to trace a very real-world, rapidly escalating scenario straight from our source material where a single dropped ball multiplies into a total facility lockdown.
Okay, let's dive into this. If we want to really understand a domino effect, well, we have to look at the very first domino, the trigger. Picture a medical laboratory on a particularly hectic day. The waiting room is completely overflowing. The queue of patients is just massive, and the clock is relentlessly ticking. We have a lab worker who is really feeling the pressure. In a total rush to get through the line, this worker skips a crucial step. They completely ignore a visibly anxious patient, failing to take the few seconds needed to just calm them down before drawing blood.
And in that rushed, stressed-out state, they make another critical error. 0. That is exactly how many pairs of gloves this worker actually put on. Skipping this incredibly basic barrier of defense means the very first domino has officially been pushed. The stage is now perfectly and dangerously set.
And that brings us right to the second domino, the physical incident. Remember that highly anxious patient the worker didn't bother to soothe? Well, anxiety doesn't just disappear, does it? It sits right there beneath the surface. So, as the worker goes in to inject the needle to draw blood, the patient's unmanaged fear peaks. They experience a sudden, violent, startle reflex. They don't just gently flinch, they forcefully yank their arm away right at the absolute worst possible second.
Because the trajectory of that needle is so violently altered, it misses the target entirely and strikes the worker's bare hand. As we all know, a needle stick injury without PPE is pretty much a worst-case scenario for blood-borne pathogen exposure. In just a fraction of a second, an administrative rush becomes a very real, very dangerous biological threat.
And guys, the momentum here is only speeding up. Now we hit domino 3. Think about it. When a human being is unexpectedly stabbed with a needle, logic just goes right out the window. Instinct takes over completely. Shocked and in sudden pain, the worker naturally flinches. They instinctively yank their own injured hand back and shake it. It's a completely involuntary reflex. But in a cramped, equipment-filled medical lab, a flailing arm is a massive hazard. Let's break down the rapid-fire steps of what happens next. 1. The worker flinches. 2. That flailing arm smacks right into a nearby sample rack holding the blood of other patients. 3. Those glass tubes plummet to the hard floor and shatter everywhere. 4. We now have a highly dangerous cocktail on our hands. The pooling patient blood mixes with a bottle of 70% alcohol that was also knocked over in all the chaos. What was a sterile environment is now completely compromised with shattered glass and a massive biohazard spill.
Now, it's bad, for sure, but it's actually about to get much worse as we hit domino 4, because human nature kicks in once again. A well-meaning coworker nearby hears the glass shatter, sees the blood, sees their colleague in distress, and, naturally, they panic. They immediately rush over to help, but in their panicked state, their eyes are locked entirely on their injured coworker. They aren't looking at the floor at all. They completely fail to check their footing as they charge headfirst into the disaster zone.
This brings us to a highly visceral, incredibly urgent detail from our source. The coworker slips on that hazardous mix of blood and alcohol. Their feet fly completely out from under them, and they fall backward, directly onto the infected, blood-covered broken glass. The danger has just violently multiplied. What was a single needle stick injury has now suddenly claimed a second victim who is actively bleeding and exposed to the exact same biological threats.
Now, what's really interesting here is that while the two workers are on the floor, a hidden environmental danger is quietly escalating in the background. We don't just have a biological hazard anymore, we now have an electrical one. That overflowing 70% alcohol is highly conductive, and it is actively flowing right toward a live power strip sitting under the table. We are literal seconds away from an electrical fire on top of everything else.
Okay, let's step back for a moment, because the whole tone of this incident completely shifts right here. The immediate, frantic physical panic, that's over, but the systemic dread is just beginning. This is domino 5. What started mere minutes ago as a simple needle prick due to a rushed worker has now rapidly expanded into a total operational disaster for the entire healthcare facility. The dominoes have officially breached the walls of this single room.
First, look at the severe medical sticks. Both workers must immediately enter post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP. As you probably know, PEP is an intensely stressful emergency medical protocol, and the psychological toll on these two individuals, who will be waiting for test results over the next few months, will be absolutely immense.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how insanely fast a localized event ripples outward to cripple an entire system. Beyond the PEP protocol, we have ruined critical patient samples, meaning sick patients have to be forced back in for stressful redraws. The lab goes on full lockdown for decontamination, bringing operations to a grinding halt. And administratively, this triggers a mountain of safety reporting and audit threats, all from one rushed moment.
All right, let's just abruptly hit the brakes on the mounting panic for a second. Take a deep breath with me. It's pretty overwhelming to see how fast things fall apart, isn't it? But this brings us to the single most important question of this entire explainer. How do we stop this catastrophic chain reaction before it ever even starts?
To truly understand prevention, we have to metaphorically rewind the tape. Let's move back and see how this builds from the ground up. We're going all the way back to the very first moment. Back to the busy waiting room, back to the rushing worker, back to the anxious patient. This is exactly where we find our chain breaker. Because the truth about a domino effect is that if you just remove the first domino, the rest simply stay standing.
Let's compare these two realities. We just saw the domino effect of a rushed worker with zero PPE. But in a chain breaker reality, we adhere strictly to standard operating procedures. The worker takes 10 seconds to calm the patient, puts on full PPE, and uses a safety needle. Even if the patient still flinches, the calm approach lessens the startle, the gloves act as a physical barrier, and the needle actually guards the sharp edge. Disaster completely averted. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital takeaway. Safety protocols, putting on those gloves, taking a breath, using the right equipment, they aren't just tedious rules handed down by management to slow you down. They are the actual physical barriers that stop the dominoes from falling. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to carry into your own life. The next time you feel tempted to skip a quote-unquote minor safety step to save a few seconds in your own workplace, ask yourself, are you willing to be the one who pushes that first domino? Keep learning, stay focused, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.